welcome to our series of programs, Mindscapes, in which we feature men and women of India whose vision, ideas and philosophies shape contemporary India. My guest today is a remarkable woman who was the first woman judge of the High Court, the first Chief Justice of a High Court, was voted by the International Lawyers Association as a living legend of law. She's a member of the Law Commission and has numerous and diverse interests. I'm delighted to welcome Justice Leila Seth. You became a woman judge in the late 1970s. Have things changed dramatically, significantly since then for women in the judicial profession?
Well, I think, yes, they have changed. I won't say dramatically, but certainly there's been a slow change. And there's been a great change from the time when I first started practice, which was in 1957-58, when in Patna High Court there were just 2 women in the whole High Court. And today in the Delhi High Court you have a large number of women, young women practicing. So there's been a great change in that way. And also I think it's become easier for women to take up the profession, because when I started to practice and I had to find a senior to actually start the practice, I went to someone called Mr. Sachin Chaudhary, who later became the finance minister, and in Calcutta, and I said to him that I wanted to join his chambers. So he said to me, you know, women are not fit for the hurly-burly of the profession, and I think that women should get married. So I told him, well, I'm actually already married. So he said, then you must go and have a child. So I said to him that, well, I have a child. He said, that's totally unfair. You must have 2 children. So I said, well, I have 2 children. So he said, you're so persistent, you come and join the profession. You'll make a good lawyer. So that's how it started. But today, it's not that way, you know. People can just get in and join chambers and start practice.
But not just, you know, in terms of the numbers of women getting into the profession, but has a sort of environment, the circumstances in which they function. How difficult is it for a woman?
Well, I suppose like in any other profession which you join, which is new for women, it's difficult, but I don't think it's that difficult, you know. And I don't think that the legal profession is that unpleasant. I mean, let's say, at least in the high courts, I think the judges are quite supportive of young lawyers, including women lawyers. But in the lower courts, of course, there's a lot of problem, because there's a lot more people and a lot more hurly-burly going on there. But there are a lot of women becoming magistrates and judges and district judges now. So you have quite a lot of interaction in that way.
Is there a feminine perspective to law and its practice and in judgments that women bring into it?
I don't really think so. There's something like a feminine point of view in that way. But I think that definitely where women's issues are concerned, definitely the fact that women have come into the profession has made a difference. And I mean, I'll say right starting from the Supreme Court, it's sort of gone downwards, flowed downwards. And the Supreme Court has been very supportive of women's issues. And to the extent that where there is no law, they have actually laid down guidelines. And they have said these guidelines will operate till the states and the center pass the laws. So in that sense, I think it's a very, what should I say, innovative way of dealing with the matter.
Is there a feminine point of view that looks at crime or looks at other issues which are not necessarily women specific? Would you tend to be more compassionate, perhaps, if it was a case of capital punishment or something?
Well, yes. Well, I suppose capital punishment is certainly an area where, I mean, most women feel that it should be done away with. But I think that's not women specific. There are many men who think the same way too. So I don't know whether it's women specific. I mean, if you take about crimes against women, like say crimes like rape, there, of course, the woman's point of view and being a woman judge would make a great deal of difference. And when you're a male judge, your attitudes are totally different. Like we have seen in some of the cases, you know, the famous case of Bhauri Devi, where she was a Sathin who was actually trying to prevent child marriage. She was doing a government job actually. And by trying to prevent that child marriage, she was raped, I mean, and gang raped. And then the judge, when acquitting her, I mean, he may not have found enough evidence, that's a different aspect. But the way he wrote that judgment, he said, oh, middle-class men don't rape women. The upper-class men don't rape lower-class women. You know, totally, I mean, I would say almost arrogant in his way of being unsympathetic, ununderstanding, and not even understanding the social obligations of society.
There is the feeling and the perception in sections of the community in some ways that you know, the judge is an impersonal interpreter of the law and sort of acts from that. But obviously that isn't the case. What are the sort of you know, the safeguards and the mechanisms that society and the constitution and the structures have to be able to sort of cultivate sensitivity and greater accountability of the judiciary?
I mean, basically, you know, a judge is supposed to be objective, you're right. You take an oath when you become a judge that you'll act without fear or favor, affection or ill will. And but all of us are creatures of our own upbringing. I mean, there's no doubt about it, you know. A person who's, you actually, by osmosis maybe, you imbibe what your friends do, what your teachers have taught you, what your parents have taught you. So that means you do have a certain kind of viewpoint. It's impossible for a human being to be without a viewpoint. But within that viewpoint, you try to be as objective as possible. And that's why, you know, in England there's been this great thing that the judges who come from a particular class are not sensitive to another type of class.
Even racially, this has become a major issue.
Yes, that's right. So you see, I mean, that's true. And therefore, when you have all male judges, then you have the same problem, that they are not sensitive to the women. Though I will say this, that many, many men are sensitive. But that is in the higher judiciary. In the lower judiciary, you do have a lot of problem with gender sensitivity. And it's something that I think has to be taught. People are not even conscious because they think that they're very gender sensitive. When there was once a seminar held in Bangalore on sensitizing the judiciary. And the men were the judges, the district judges and some of the magistrates, I mean, they couldn't believe that they were being asked to sort of attend such a seminar. You know, so it's something that has to come with slow kind of teaching and consciousness, you know.
Have you ever felt sort of, you know, sitting as a judge and presiding over a case, a conflict between, you know, what was legally, you know, correct and what was just?
Yes, definitely. I don't think that is. I don't think that's. I think that's someone which everyone goes through, because sometimes the law is not just. I mean, I'll give you an instance. I mean, something as simple as the Christian Marriage Act, the Indian Divorce Act, what they call, has a provision that a man can get a divorce on the ground of adultery, and if a woman wants a divorce, she has to prove adultery plus sodomy or adultery plus cruelty. Now it's totally unjust. And while the law stands, you have no choice.
So does it break your heart? Do you tear your hair out when you have to administer that kind of
of course,
judgment?
You feel very upset, and you record in the judgment that this is an archaic law. Parliament should change this law, but you can do nothing because it's so clear. But where the law is not clear, sometimes it does happen that the law is not that clear, then of course you can, you know,
a creative interpretation of
use a creative interpretation and empathize with the underprivileged or with wherever you think the justice, the side that justice lies on, you know. There you can do it. You can stretch. But there are some places where you can't stretch at all. You have no choice in the matter.
You are a member of the Law Commission, which is looking at some of these issues, and I think there is great anguish that you know, not just in sort of the more critical issues, but you know, the sheer number of irrelevant laws that we have in India. You know, how successful or effective do you hope this initiative, this effort will be?
Well, I think before I joined the Law Commission, I wanted to know how many reports of the Law Commission I implemented. Because I thought it will be a useless exercise if you just go on writing reports and they're never implemented. And I found that 50% are implemented. So that's, I think, a reasonable figure. And presently, of course, we've been working on various things, and we are now working on co-partnership rights for women, one of the things we are looking at. And then the other is on the question of sexual assault on women and children, because we think the law there needs some changing, because it's not really good enough the way it is. So let's see what happens.
You know, in terms of the unfolding of the legal system, there is a popular perception that you don't really get justice, or it takes a very long time, and justice delayed is justice denied. Where do you think real hope and salvation lies? We have all these sort of proposals, things being thrown out. What's tangible and practical?
You know, this is something which is really heartbreaking for anyone who's connected with the law. You think that the criminal justice system is almost sort of breaking down. I mean, cases don't come up for hearing. People are not convicted for 5, 7, 10 years it takes. I mean, who can wait? If it's a civil case, it may take 15 years. And then there are appeals, further appeals. I mean, it is just, unending, the whole procedure. And as a result of it, people say, why shouldn't we go outside the law? Now, of course, there's been a lot of thinking, and one of the methods that has come up is Lok Adalats, which has been to an extent very successful, because you get quick justice. You don't have to go into such detailed evidence. You may not get the exact figure. Suppose it's a compensation to be paid, you may not get the exact figure that you would get, but you get a little bit less or a little bit more in different cases, and you can go home, and there are no appeals. And I think that's one of the very important areas that has started.
Even when sort of justice is delayed,
yes.
There still isn't sufficient faith in the system. You sort of still feel that maybe there are some judges who can be influenced. There are lawyers whose loyalty to their clients can be bought.
Yes.
And we have frequently sort of held out to the world that we have an effective judicial system, a system of judicial justice. That's not really our experience in most cases.
Well, I'll say this, that let's put it in the higher judiciary. Basically, you don't find judges that are corrupt. I mean, since that's one of the aspects we're looking at. In the lower judiciary, we can't say that is totally true. And I would say that hopefully there are more women in the judiciary, that things will be improved, because I think that women by nature are more cautious and they do less networking. And I think to be corrupt you have to do some kind of networking as well. So I think maybe that's one of the areas that, well, we hope at least that they would be less corrupt, and maybe that's one way of looking at it. But the bigger problem which I see is that the process is so slow. Then, as we see in so many cases, the witnesses give us a particular story to the police. When they come to court, they give a totally different story.
Right.
And this whole system of the Anglo-Saxon system of law, I don't know whether it's eventually suited for our country.
So what kind of system of law would be, when you call that an Anglo-Saxon system, so what would be an indigenous system?
Well, I mean, in the old days what happened? In the village, people knew who had committed the crime.
Right.
And they actually took action against him. I mean, you do have the odd case where the caste system comes in and people would take action caste-wise.
Right.
I mean, I remember that when I first came back to practice, and the very first case I did, it was what was called amicus curiae by a friend of the court. It was a case of dacoity. And there was a friend of mine who was senior advocate, and I asked him to help me because it was my first case. And I had read the whole, he said, read the brief and come back. And I read the brief, and then he said to me, he said, what caste are the witnesses and what caste is the accused? And I said, I never even thought of that. He said, well, that's a very important question because it depends that it was in Bihar. And he said, it's very important to see because it may be that they're just accusing him wrongly because he's of a different caste. Now, I mean, this is something that would never have struck me, but that's the reality.
Sure.
So you see, I mean, that's why I say the Anglo-Saxon system doesn't take these factors into consideration,
Yet you were trained at the bar and with great distinction in the Anglo-Saxon system of law. How difficult was it for you personally to set out of India and pursue a legal profession at that time in your life and in the social history of India?
Well, it was not extremely easy, I'll say this, because for one thing, you know, it was like I was something a novelty for people, and even the clients in Bihar would not refer to me. They would refer to me as Leela Babu. You know, they referred to me with the male element. You know, they couldn't think of women actually practicing, and they would. I think a client would go to a man in preference unless you were equal plus. You had to actually provide something more for the same money before you would have a client coming to you. You know, and it was difficult.
And what was it like being an Indian woman pursuing a legal education in England?
Well, that was no difficulty there. You know, in England in 57, 54 to 57, I think there was no problem. There were so many women from all over the world. In those days, a lot of people used to go to do the bar. Now, of course, the bar is not regularly recognized. And at that stage, there were lots of women from many countries.
And what about the family and your immediate environment? Was it supportive?
I think whatever I've achieved, I must give credit to my husband. He's an extremely supportive person. And to the extent that he even looked after my second son, who was born in London a few months before the exam. So he was extremely supportive. So
well, you have three very exceptional children, and Vikram is the best known of them, Vikram Seth. Did you feel he was a special child when he was growing up?
Well, I think for a mother, all children are special, because he was the firstborn. And so in that sense, he was special, and he was very creative. He was a very sensitive child, and he always needed a lot of care and affection. And if he didn't get it, even today, I think, if he doesn't get it, he wilts. But he's a poet at heart, you know.
Vikram's many masterpieces, when do you get to read them?
I don't read them when he's writing them. When he completes them, then he gives them to us to see, and then, if necessary, to criticize. But while he's writing, he doesn't share it. Because he thinks that if he shares it while he's writing, it would disturb him, and we would sort of start picking holes or doing this or that, the other. And especially with Suitable Boy, because there was some elements of family in it, you know.
Right.
So we never saw it till it was totally complete. And then we did we did read them.
So what did it feel like to have aspects of your own family and your own circumstance, shall I say, immortalized in A Suitable Boy?
Well, in a way, you know, there's no character there that's totally real except Rupa Mehra, that's my mother. And she's exactly as she is in the book. And so it's wonderful, and unfortunately she had died before the book came out, so we could enjoy it and, you know, share that. And the others are all composite characters. But there are certain elements, certain stories, certain facts that are correct and, you know, and true, and so it's fun to read.
You know, Vikram and I were contemporaries at Oxford, and it was fairly evident then that, you know, this was a man who was going to go places, and there was genius lurking there. When did you, as a mother, get that feeling, or the discovery, perhaps?
I don't know. I don't think of him as genius even today, because we're so close, you know. But I think of him as a son, and a creative son. But I always knew that he had a sensitivity, because even when he was in Doon School and he wrote poems off and on. I remember once there was this bear that had been shot by somebody, one of the boys, and they had written a whole article about how wonderful it was going for the shoot. And Vikram had written a poem about the baby bear who was shot. And you could sense the sensitivity in him, you know, and how sad and bad he felt, you know, for the little bear, rather than for these hunters who were so proud of themselves.
You know, you're also involved in education, and you're on the governing body of a women's college in Delhi. You chair it in schools and what have you. In what ways do you feel that women need a different or perhaps a special education, you think?
I think most people need a special education, to tell you very frankly. And I'm very sad, really, that the fact that because we are a secular country, we don't even teach moral science in school. I think that, you know, I went to a convent, so I learnt about the Catholic religion, but at the same time the non-Catholics were taught moral science. And I think that that is something which holds me in good stead, you know, and I feel that it's done a great deal for me. And I feel that when children don't get any moral training in school, because of this reason that we can't teach any religion, at least if we don't teach any religion, let's teach the tenets of moral teaching, because if you don't have that, you have nothing to fall back on. What do you think about life? Life is for yourself to enjoy. Life is not for it. Life is for the privileged to support the underprivileged, to have an equal society, to have life with dignity. But that's never taught to people, and if they don't teach them that, they're not going to learn it. And I feel very strongly about this.
I think there is a great struggle in terms of trying to sensitize people as to how you can teach values. It's not the same as teaching physics, chemistry, and maths. You know, you don't just teach it and tell people about it and they somehow imbibe it. So the processes of change and shift and transformation are much more complex.
Yes.
And equally in terms of the status of women and how women are treated in society.
Right. Yes.
And we in India have some of the best, you know, legislation and laws pertaining to the status and rights of women. Yet it hasn't sufficiently permeated or made an impact in the quality of life and experience of women. What else needs to be done, and who might do it? Do we just wait for the government?
No, I think we have to do it ourselves. We have to start from sensitizing in the homes, from sensitizing in the schools, from sensitizing in the books. I mean, you read books where stands are taken in one way or the other. Or you read, you're told in school that you go into schools and you start competing with everybody. You're better, I'm worse. I mean, I don't think that's the kind of schools we should have. I feel that we should have schools where you're competing only with yourself, but actually you're cooperating with everybody else, but you're not taking the credit for yourself. Because if you don't care who gets the credit, you will achieve a great deal. And I think that's very important, but I think that's somehow not coming through. And I don't know exactly how to do it, but I think that, well, NGOs, social workers have been moving, and private colleges, private schools have been moving towards that. And I think that the government should do it too, because the large majority of children go to government schools. I mean, the large majority of children don't go to schools at all, which is the real sadness in this country.
Well, I should just share with you an interesting, we were doing a project on the Rishi Valley School, and they had this amazing predicament. You know, Krishnamurti was very against the whole notion of competition and what have you. And so it was sports day, and they had athletics, and they wondered how they could resolve this idea of persuading, you know, young people to do their best and to run really fast and eliminate the idea of competition. You know, to have 6 people done round a running lane and then yet not have a winner in that sense. So I think the issues have their many sort of nuances and complexities. And you are remarkable for the sheer range and number of areas and issues that you're looking at. Human rights, environment, education, of course, law, and a whole ambit of these. What is your sort of, do you have a core passion?
Well, I think they're all interlinked. If you look at it, if you want people to live their lives with dignity, then environment is crucial. Human rights are crucial. Law is crucial. Women's rights are crucial. I think they're all interlinked. I don't, education, of course, according to me, the biggest gift that my parents gave us was the gift of education. My father died when I was 11 years old. My mother really didn't have enough money. But the one thing she said was that I will continue your education. And I think that was the biggest gift she gave us. And I think that's the biggest gift we can give to children in India. I feel, really strongly about education. In fact, to me, that's, according to me, giving primary education to children is one of the most important things. And in fact, we've done a report, which I pushed really, at the Law Commission about primary education for children, that it should be their right. And of course, it's now been made into a fundamental right by the Supreme Court judgment. So I don't know why we're not getting it.
If the Prime Minister of India were to meet with you and say, just as Leila said, what do you think should be number 1 on my agenda? What would you say?
Education. And education for girls in particular. That's what I would say. I have no doubt in my mind about that, because I think that is the key to eventually us changing our attitudes and becoming aware of what is really necessary in this country. And I think unless we change our attitudes, we're not going to be, the laws cannot make the difference. The laws are just like a springboard, you know, to set you in a direction, to set you on track. But without attitudinal changes, we're not going to get anywhere.
Leila Seth, thank you very much. It's been a great privilege. Thank you.